Attention all F1 fans, welcome to F1 Max. Are you worried that this season will be another walk in the park for Red Bull just like last year? In the season opener in Bahrain, Max Verstappen and his team dominated the race, leaving no one else close to the finish line. But is this season just a procession, or will Red Bull face some real challenges? In this video, F1 Max will take a closer look at Red Bull's dominance last year, their concerns for this year, and the punishment that they've received from the FIA that may be hindering their progress. Stay tuned to find out why Red Bull is still dominating the early stages of this season, even after being punished by the FIA. F1 fans must have had horrible flashbacks to last season when they saw Max Verstappen pulling away from the field straight away. By the third lap, Max had already extended his lead to more than 2 seconds, with Charles Leclerc never getting the chance to get close to Max off the line. In fact, the race was such a breeze that Red Bull finished 38 seconds ahead of Aston Martin, as well as 48 seconds ahead of Ferrari. Max and Sergio were the only 2 drivers from the top 4 teams to use the soft compound for the second stint of the race. This alternative strategy clearly did not hurt the team. What will worry F1 fans is that last year Red Bull dominated the championship, winning 17 races, which was a Formula 1 record. The championship race was over pretty quickly, and so the season was nowhere near as exciting as in 2021. Red Bull's comments after the race will have worried fans even more. German newspaper Auto, Motor and Sport reported that Max and Sergio have their engines turned down for the remainder of the race. This happened around the time of the second round of pit stops. Red Bull understand that Formula 1 engines can be pretty unpredictable at times. Honda engines have not always been the most reliable, and so whenever they can, Red Bull will look to protect the engines. They would have been pleased to see Charles Leclerc retiring with engine issues, but they would have wanted to avoid their own problems. In fact, Red Bull even had to tell Max Verstappen to slow down as he wanted to still push the car as fast as possible. Max's race engineer, Gianpiero Lambiase, had to plead with him to slow down as he didn't need to push. Lambiase had to repeat himself so much that on the radio he said,
"Max, so you're looking for plus 0.7 on the dash. I'll get bored of this, so just please do it."
Even Max's own team can't seem to slow him down. So while it may seem as though Max Verstappen cannot be stopped from winning a title, there is one factor Red Bull are worried about hurting their progress later in the season. Red Bull was so incredibly dominant in the 2022 season that teams were wondering how they'd gained this advantage. But when investigations began into the finances of the championship-winning team, it was actually taking a look back at the 2021 season. October 2022, Red Bull admitted they'd breached the budget cap by less than 5%. At the time, the team called this a procedural breach and a minor financial overspend. The FIA began investigating this overspend, and 3 weeks later, they'd come up with what they believed was a suitable punishment. Red Bull were fined $7 million for their budget overspend as part of an accepted breach agreement. The FIA stated that Red Bull had breached 13 points of non-compliance, which is what caused the large fine. The money was not a big problem for Red Bull, as they have invested hundreds of millions into this sport. The bigger issue was the other punishment the FIA dished out. Red Bull had 10% of their permitted aerodynamic research taken away from them. This might not seem substantial, but it can be when you realize how important that research is. F1 teams get very little chance to actually test their cars on track. This means that they run a huge amount of simulations on how they believe the car would react on track. The wind tunnel is part of how they conduct this research. A wind tunnel allows F1 teams to simulate the air movement the car will face when it gets on track. They can see how different parts of the car affect the top speed and find the fastest components for their cars. Every new design and concept for an F1 car is run through the wind tunnel before it is tested out on track. Red Bull have therefore lost some of their wind tunnel time, and they're already at a disadvantage. To help equal out the field, Formula 1 has a sliding scale for wind tunnel time based on success from the previous season. The team who finished first in the Constructors' Championship the prior season gets the least wind tunnel time, while the team in last gets the most. Red Bull were already going to have the least wind tunnel time of any F1 team in 2023. But now their time has been reduced even further. I mean, it is the exact opposite of what Red Bull needed this season. But if the Red Bull team is at a serious disadvantage this season with wind tunnel time, why are they still dominating the early stages? One of the main reasons why it's not hurt Red Bull massively yet is because they really did not need to make many changes from the RB18, which was the car that the team produced in 2022. I mean, that car dominated the championship to a level we've not seen before. So it would have been pretty stupid for the team to rip up the design and start again. 2023 has also not brought any major technical regulations that would require Red Bull to make large changes to the car. So if they were not required to either, why would Red Bull make large-scale changes to their car? The RB18 was one of the most dominant Formula 1 cars in the sport's history, so it would make sense for the team to use a similar concept, with a few minor alterations. That is exactly what the team have done, and it seems to be working out pretty well for them so far. It was very late in the season when the FIA decided they would investigate Red Bull for their budget cap breaches of 2021. In fact, the punishment for the team only came in from the FIA with a few weeks of the 2022 season remaining. By that point, Red Bull had already decided on the concept they would use to begin the 2023 season. F1 cars take a huge amount of planning, and so it is actually pretty common for teams to be working on next year's car in the middle of the season. So what we're seeing at the moment is a Red Bull car unaffected by the wind tunnel penalty. This car would have been ready to go around the time that the penalty came in, but that does not mean that we won't see the impact of that penalty later in the season. The wind tunnel penalty is much more likely to affect Red Bull later in the season. That is because the wind tunnel time penalty will affect any future developments that Red Bull want to bring to their car. Teams will still do a lot of development on their cars once the season has started. So what we could see is that other teams are able to bring upgrades later in the season, when Red Bull struggle to upgrade their car. In the past, we've seen Red Bull be one of the best teams at bringing updates to their car. But it seems like this won't happen this year. Could this mean that we actually have a title race later in the year? Well, a few important people have spoken about the impact of the penalty later in the season. When asked about the impact of the wind tunnel penalty, Horner said, "I think it's something you have to view over a 12-month period. Because it's not just this year's car, it's next year's car. I think the really positive thing for us is that we're not dealing with a fundamental issue that soaks up that resource and time." Horner's comments sound positive, but they do highlight a real concern for the team. If an aerodynamic issue comes up for the team, this could take up a huge amount of their wind tunnel time, and Red Bull don't have a lot of wind tunnel time to use. So there could be issues down the road for Red Bull. Horner is not the only man to speak about the impact of Red Bull's penalty. Formula 1 CEO Stefano Domenicali has said that just because Red Bull are on top at the moment doesn't mean the season will go like that. Domenicali said, "We saw it last year when there was a Ferrari in top form with many points clear and everyone said the season was over." He added, "Last year Red Bull had to pay a fine for breaking the budget cap, meant to have a certain effect during the World Championship that just started." So while some believe that the wind tunnel cap will have a big impact on Red Bull later in the season, there is also some skepticism as to whether it will really slow Red Bull down. Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff was asked about the impact of the wind tunnel penalty, saying, "The lack of wind tunnel time is certainly not great for them and an advantage for us this season. But if you have an efficient machine, you can certainly compensate for that, or large parts of it," Toto added. "So long term, good for us, but we've been in that situation, obviously without a penalty in the years before. We've won, and therefore, we had less wind tunnel time than everybody else for the last 2 seasons. It is a notable point that Mercedes' dominance of the hybrid era was not affected by them having fewer time in the wind tunnel. Red Bull will certainly be able to manage this penalty, and will have planned for this to hurt them later in the season. So what do you think? Is this season just a procession, or will the wind tunnel penalty slow Red Bull down? Why not put your thoughts in the comments below? While you're down there, why not like the video and hit the subscribe button? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.